Hello everyone, this is the Municipalists. This is part 4, so let's just jump right into it. The only plane available on such short notice was one of our four-seaters, so Owen and I were forced to sit uncomfortably close, facing one another in two of the cramped cabin's disproportionately large white leather armchairs. Among other things, I was busy mulling over the convincing groan of leather that had sounded as Owen took his seat out, as well as the way the seat's padding seemed to give beneath him as if it were supporting real weight. I was also trying to determine the way one might, when left alone with a dog or a small child, just how aware of me this image of a man was, and to what extent he and I would be able to interact. As the pilot chatted with the tower, Owen was busy looking around the cabin inquisitively. "I know everything there is to know about planes," he said after some time, "but I've never been on one." I was surprised by his tone, which was boyishly self-assured. Before I could think of anything to say in response, the plane started to take off. As we shot up the runway and began our ascent, Owen turned around in his seat to watch the pilot with guarded enthusiasm, like someone interested in seeing a card trick performed, despite the fact that he already knew the secret that made it work. Once we reached altitude, he chuckled to himself and turned back around. Satisfied with either the performance of the pilot or the nature of flight in general, he then exhaled deeply and clapped his hands together, the sound of it echoing sharply in the small cabin. "Okay," he said, sounding reluctant to get down to business. "How can I be of assistance?" "Actually," I said, "could you start by telling me what you are exactly?" He considered the question. "What am I?" "Well, I'm a 3D projection of the agency supercomputer, and you are is a bipedal ape with high manual dexterity and a brain that's only really impressive if you take into account the fact that you grew it yourself. Now maybe you'd prefer to ask a slightly less insulting question, like, who am I?" "Oh," I said, "I didn't mean any offense. Who are you?" "I already told you. The name's Owen. Try to keep up." I told him this all seemed remarkable, and he smiled. "Now you're getting it," he said. The technical wonders involved in all allowing me to converse with Owen on an agency jet as if he were a fellow passenger seemed staggering, not least of all because the technicians at headquarters had only recently gotten Owen back up and running. Even after everyone was given the all clear to resume using Owen-linked technology, we were all reluctant to do so. Agents who worked on the top floors had been taking the stairs instead of risking getting stuck in the elevators, and despite several memos I circulated reminding everyone that it was a fireable offense, no one had any compunctions about keeping our secure doors propped open with office chairs. For research queries, the physical archives had become suddenly popular, its once empty stacks now abuzz with agents who felt more comfortable compiling the reports and analysis the old-fashioned way. Garrett had released a statement apologizing for the fact that the virus had exploited a secret self-destruct function in our phones, which were supposed to have been used only in individual cases to protect confidential agency data. Replacement phones with the self-destruct function removed had already been distributed, but most agents had opted to pay out of pocket for their own private cell phones. I'd gone to the Iverson Mall myself to purchase a mobile phone that was in my bag, still waiting to be activated. In short, trust in Owen was at a nadir, and I wasn't sure how I felt about the fact that Garrett had sent me on such an uncertain mission with some Owen tech as my own ally. Before the virus, Owen had been working almost at capacity on a constant basis, but now he said his usage was practically down to zero, something he seemed to take personally. He described the aftermath of the virus with some embarrassment. From his point of view, the whole thing had been like a terrible fever in which he was both himself and not himself, his own components performing tasks without him while he looked on in horror. Though the way he used the phrase human error to describe the various security loopholes that had allowed a virus to be uploaded in the first place made it clear that he directed blame more at the agency technicians than at himself. According to Owen, the whole situation couldn't have come at a worse time. The agency's R&D division had been working on its projected interface for years, combining the latest developments in optics, deep learning, sonic projection, nanotechnology, and more. The attack had happened just as they were entering the final stages. "I'm still not feeling entirely myself," Owen said, but Gus felt that, given the recent unpleasantness, it was important to demonstrate my effectiveness. The Gus who referred to was the aforementioned Dr. Gustav Claus, a renowned mathematician and computer engineer whose seminal work on parallel processing had earned him a Nobel Prize and the coveted Sterling motherboard from the Kelby Clank Institute. He was Owen's creator and developer, though Owen spoke of him with a sort of irreverent familiarity that one might use when describing an eccentric relative. It wouldn't have surprised me if Claus had encouraged this attitude. Owen's name purportedly stood for Object-Oriented Database and Working Acoustics Network, though many suspected that Claus had just retrofitted the acronym so he could name the supercomputer after a beloved younger brother. Claus had personally designed the hardware for this new interface, which Owen pointed out was the large tie clip I was wearing, containing a series of projectors as well as an array of sensory equipment. Claus had also developed a complex system of parameters that Owen referred to as protocols. These parameters controlled everything from the way his projector automatically adjusted to surrounding stimuli to his basic disposition when interacting with others. To hear Owen tell it, his introduction to human interaction had consisted primarily of talking to Claus and watching movies with him. It was common knowledge that Claus's preferred genre was old gangster films. His lab walls decorated with large color posters of Pepe Le Monco and Each Dawn I Die. Owen spoke fondly of the films of Kurosawa and claimed to have a great admiration for Charlie Chaplin, but it was nothing compared to the way his face lit up when he talked about James Cagney or Edward G. Robinson. Claus's love of mobsters could be seen in his massive pompadour of gray hair and penchant for loud suits. This vanity seemed to be a gift that had been passed down to his newest creation. As we spoke, Owen grew preoccupied with his own physical appearance, looking down to adjust the pattern of his tie or the cut of his suit through an apparent act of will. He would frown with the concentration and sprout cufflinks and pocket squares and boutonnieres, his voice becoming distant while he answered my questions, as if anything I said was clearly of secondary importance to his deciding whether or not his blazer looked better with a peach carnation or a plum-colored pocket square in a 4-point fold. When I asked him if he could focus on our conversation, he asserted that he was able to focus on everything in his immediate vicinity at once. With the aid of sonar, infrared, satellite relay, and all the other complicated sensors and data feeds managed by the clip on my tie, he was able to see everything from the back of my head to the pilot's mustache in the plane's position over the Atlantic. He was able to combine all of the sensory data into a single synthesized impression while continuing to sit across from me and fiddle with his tie. Apparently, there were hundreds of identical tie clips back in Suitland waiting to be distributed to the other agents. Owen explained that the ultimate goal of the new interface was for each agent to enjoy the service of someone who not only had access to our database, but was our database. Someone who could check the status of every electrical grid in the country in real time, report on traffic conditions, and cite building codes off the top of his head. These clips would also be able to capture an unimaginable amount of raw data just by means of that agent going about his or her normal duties throughout the city, working in conjunction with our existing drone program. Our agency could come closer than ever to a perfect system for monitoring the progress and needs of our nation's cities. It was an undeniably thrilling vision for the future of the agency, though he was also rather frank about the fact that the project had missed several important deadlines and gone severely over budget. After all the additional setbacks that followed the virus, it was obvious why Claus had jumped at the chance to use the interface to impress Garrett. In terms of how useful it actually was in its present form, I remained skeptical, but Owen seemed confident enough in himself for both of us. As our conversation returned to his various abilities, he became much more animated and even stopped adjusting his clothes as well. When I asked how his body managed to make an impression on his chair, he demonstrated that it was an optical illusion by creating a similar indentation on one of the cabin's empty seats. As far as the grain of leather was concerned, he pointed to one of the apertures on my tie clip and told me that I was able to throw sound up to 100 feet at over 180 ear-splitting decibels. When I asked him how this was possible, he waggled his fingers like a magician and switched subjects, pointing to another aperture that he explained could project images around obstructions. He had me hold my hand 3 inches in front of the tie clip to show how, using just the silver clasp of my watch band, the lens was able to continue projecting his image sitting across from me without interruption. I also knew from my own experience that he'd had to step directly over a 200-watt runway light before his projection had been forced to carry out any perceivable adjustments. Even more incredible was when he projected light onto my person, camouflaging me to the cabin's interior so that I appeared almost invisible. Pleased by my astonishment, he went on to perform impressions of Garrett and Claus, taking on their shapes and voices with an amazing degree of accuracy. Owen referred to these skills as emergent capabilities, meaning they weren't intentional consequences of his design, but were simply possible given the makeup of his interface. While Claus had been aware of some of them, Owen had stumbled upon most of them himself. However, these fascinating displays soon degenerated into him cycling through a few dozen hairstyles, asking for my opinion on each. I mentioned that I never worried much about my hair when I was out in the field, since Garrett preferred us all to wear our hats. I gestured toward the fedora resting on my bag near my feet in an effort to use our present conversation as a teachable moment, but Owen only looked down at the hat and laughed. "Oh, I know," he said. "You all look like idiots." I was surprised by this comment, as I was by the fact that he was now holding what appeared to be a tumbler of whiskey, its cut glass glinting in the soft light of the cabin. "It's a program I wrote for myself," he said, noticing my interest. "When I take a sip, a series of complex math problems are generated that overwhelm my interface's processors. It diverts resources away from my less essential functions like social intelligence and inhibition." He described this process with pride, as if drinking on the job were an innovation that rivaled the light bulb. Not wanting to take too much credit, he admitted that he had come up with it by watching Claus drink in his lab late at night. When I asked Owen what purpose this program served, he only frowned as if it were the wrong question, and took another sip before smacking his lips and saying, "It relaxes me." "But do you think it's appropriate?" Owen said, winking. "Don't worry about that. Your boss doesn't want an official record of any of this because he can't have the board find out. He had me put up a memory partition, so you're the only one at the agency who has the access to the data. I gather while we're in Metropolis, we can do whatever we want." That's it for part 4. Thank you for coming. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.